Howdy, I'm Brian Larson, Associate Professor of Law at Texas A&M University School of Law. This video is one of a series I've made available for students in my classes. You can find information about videos here and on my academic webpage at rhetoric.com. If you are one of my students and have questions, please use our course website or learning management system to reach out to me. Other folks may feel free to leave questions and comments here on YouTube. Except where otherwise noted, you may make use of this video subject to a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives version 4.0 international license. Some materials displayed in this video may be subject to the copyright of others, but I either have a license or assert that I'm making fair use of them here. The focus of this video is on how to read a federal statute. As one example of how you might read a text, let's take a look at the Federal Age Discrimination Statute. We'll use the commercial research service Westlaw for this demonstration. I'll assume that you can get logged on to Westlaw and that your supervisor has already asked you to consider whether certain conduct, the refusal to hire the potential plaintiff, violates Title 29 of the United States Code, Section 623. Remember when reading a statute that you want to organize your work into 4 steps. First, consider the context in which the statute appears. Second, assess the organization of the statutory section. Third, determine the status of the section, whether it's good law and whether courts have interpreted and applied it. And finally, read the statute carefully and brief it. As a preliminary matter, make sure that the scope box says all state and federal. You can click on it to change it if necessary. To find the statute on Westlaw, type in the citation in the search box, 29 U.S.C. 623. There's no need for capitals or periods with the letters USC when searching here, as Westlaw knows what you're trying to do. It displays the statutory section. First, we'll look at the statutory context. It's important to try to check out the parts of the statute near the section you are analyzing to make sure you understand where it fits in. You are particularly interested in the purpose of the section, any definitions applicable to it, and whether there might be agency rules and regulations that affect your problem. Right away, we can see from the contextual outline that Section 623 is part of Chapter 14 of Title 29 of the United States Code Annotated. Note that the United States Code Annotated is Westlaw's annotated version of the United States Code. If we click on the table of contents, we can see more of the context. If we scroll up slightly, we can see that this provision appears early in Chapter 14 of the statutory title. We can immediately see that Section 621 provides a congressional statement of findings and purpose. This statement is part of the statutory text and can play an important role in interpreting other sections in the same chapter. Click on it to read that section. We can see that subsection B provides a statement of purpose for the whole chapter. You can navigate back to Section 623 by clicking the table of contents or just clicking the back button in the browser. Let's use the table of contents again. There are 2 other things you may want to check out. First, note that Section 628 mentions rules and regulations. If we visit that section, we can see that the statute authorizes an executive agency, the EEOC, to make regulations to enforce this act, and it may also make rule-based exemptions from this act. We should note that, and later we'll have to look to see whether any rulemaking might affect our client. Back to the table of contents, scroll down a little further to Section 630, Definitions. What's important to note here is that Section 630 has definitions that apply to Chapter 14, where we are. So, as we are interpreting and briefing our rule, we will want to note that some of the terms in it will be defined here. Let's return to Section 623 by the table of contents. Next, we'll consider section organization. Statutory sections can be very long. In fact, 29 U.S.C. section 623 is more than 4,500 words long. So you need to start by assessing the organization of the statute. When you do so, you want to consider what activities, actors, and objects of action the statute covers. You should also identify exceptions applicable to your problem. Many sections to the federal statutes have subsections labeled with lowercase letters, like subsection A here. Westlaw also bolds them and shows indentation so you can see the organization. In section 623, that's helpful because the subsection titles and first clause in each subsection give you a sense of whose conduct that subsection governs. Subsection A talks about employer practices. Subsection B, employment agencies. Subsection C, labor organization practices, and this would include unions. Subsection H talks about practices of foreign corporations and employers. And subsection M applies only to higher education institutions. Then, subsection J provides special rules for firefighters and police officers. A brief review of the other subsections suggests their purposes. So subsection D prevents retaliation against employees who complain of discrimination, and subsection E prevents advertising that embodies age discrimination. 3 subsections are special because they provide exceptions. So subsection F lists things that might be illegal under earlier subsections, but that are accepted from the rule's application. These could be critically important to our project. Subsections L and M also provide some exceptions. You should always want to note such exceptions if it's possible they might apply in our context. If you're unsure whether they apply, you should note them and figure out what additional information you need to decide whether they're applicable. Section I is a lengthy treatment of pension benefit plans and related matters. You'd read it carefully if your problem had to do with pensions. Next, let's consider Section 623's currency and status in case law. The top of the statutory sections page in Westlaw tells you important things about whether the statute is good law. First, the yellow flag tells you there is some negative treatment, and a couple more yellow flags explain specific concerns. Depending on the nature of our problem, we might want to follow up on these alerts. Scrolling down a little, we can see currentness, which is just a link to the bottom of the page. It tells us this version of the statute is current through a particular public law. You could look up that public law to see its date, but the pay services like Westlaw are usually updated at least daily. Just above this currentness information is a link to notes of decisions. These are cases that have interpreted and apply the statute. Westlaw selects and organizes these decisions according to an outline available on that page. If you are wondering about the definition of a term in the statutory text that is not defined there or in another part of the statute, you can often find guidance by looking for cases that have defined the term. Now let's brief the rule. So you've considered the statutory provision's context, organization, and status. Now, based on the facts of your situation, you need to brief the parts of the rule that apply to you. We assumed at the beginning that we were interested in the actions of an employer who failed to hire a potential plaintiff. Based on that assumption, subsection A seems most important. Note here that the normative conclusion, it shall be unlawful for an employer, has 3 conditions, joined by an or. That makes this rule disjunctive. There is an offense if the employer committed any one or more of these 3 things, assuming that none of the exceptions we identified elsewhere in the section apply. Here, the person who might be the plaintiff never became an employee, so we need not carefully analyze paragraphs 2 or 3 because they are not applicable. Next, when we're done analyzing the operative subsection, we need to head to the subsections F, L, and M, each of which has exceptions, to see if any of those exceptions apply to our problem. That's it. If you are one of my students and have questions, please use our course website or learning management system to reach out to me. Others may feel free to leave questions and comments here on YouTube.